A very good morning to all of you. Science and Technology Standard 10 Part 2. In this book, we have 10 lessons to cover. Today, we are going to look into lesson number 1, Heredity and Evolution. Before getting into the lesson and topics, let us recall the previous knowledge of 9th standard and try to answer these questions. Which component of the cellular nucleus of the living organism carries heredity characters? The component of the cellular nucleus of the living organism that carries heredity character is chromosomes. What do we call to the process of transfer of mental and physical characters from parents to offspring? The process of transfer of traits from parents to the progeny is referred to as heredity. The transfer of physical and mental characters may take place either through asexual reproduction or sexual reproduction. Which are the components of DNA molecule? DNA has 3 types of chemical component: phosphate, a sugar called deoxyribose, and 4 nitrogenous bases: adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. 2 of the bases, adenine and guanine, have a double ring structure characteristic of a type of chemical called a purine. In this lesson, we have many subtopics, but today we will look into heredity, inheritance, and traits. The transmission of genetic characters or qualities from parents to offspring is called as inheritance. DNA copying plays an important role in inheritance characters from parents to offspring. It also brings about some variations each time. The offsprings, though similar to the parents, subtly differ from each other. Variations exhibited by individuals can accumulate through heredity and produce some species that are more evolved than their parents. In asexual mode of reproduction, minor differences are observed in the offspring as the variation in DNA copying are very small. But greater diversities are created during sexual mode of reproduction that can be explained by the laws of inheritance. Heredity is the passing of traits or characters from parents to the offspring. What is the difference between heredity and hereditary? Heredity is the process that decides the passing down of traits from the older generation to the new generations. Whereas hereditary is a word that indicates something that shows this process. Heredity is a noun, whereas hereditary is an adjective. Here on the screen, you have some characters and traits: the father, the mother, and the offspring. Let's try to understand in detail. Although offsprings resemble their parents, they differ in some aspects. The resemblance and differences are due to heredity. In this picture, you can see the father has blue eyes and the mother has black eyes. And the offspring, the child, gets black eyes. In this case, the child has black colored eyes as the mother, whereas the father has blue eyes. Here we have 2 different eye color. Similarly, we have other colors of eyes that exist in nature. So the eye color is the character. The eye color can vary among the population of a particular species. On the other hand, blue or black color of the eyes which is exclusive for that particular individual. For example, eye color, height, hair color are the characters, whereas black or blue, tall or short, black or blonde are the traits. Now tell me one thing. If this boy has inherited the traits from his parents, why he is not the exact copy of the parents? Why does he look slightly different from both? The answer lies in single line called variation, which means differences. Variation means differences. The offspring of dogs will be dogs and humans' offspring will be humans only. Although offsprings resemble their parents, they differ in some aspects. The resemblances and differences are due to heredity. What is the difference between heredity and variation? The main difference between heredity and variation is that heredity is the mechanism which transmits characters, resemblance as well as differences to the offspring from the parents, whereas variation represents the visible differences shown by individuals within offspring and species. Let's understand Mendel's law for inheritance of traits. Gregor John Mendel, who is the father of genetics. Mendel carried out research with green garden pea plant and formulated the laws of inheritance. Mendel carried out the research work and he came up with a conclusion that the basic underlying principle of inheritance he discovered apply to humans also, other animals also, because the mechanism of heredity are essentially the same for all complex life forms. Mendelian law of inheritance are statements about the way certain characteristics are transmitted from one generation to the another in an organism. The mechanism of heredity are essentially the same for all complex life forms. Mendelian laws of inheritance are statements about the way certain characteristics are transmitted from one generation to another in an organism. Mendel's law of inheritance of traits, law of segregation, law of independent assortment, law of dominance. Genetics. What is genetics? The scientific study of heredity. Genetics pertains to human and all other organisms. So for example, there is a human genetics, mouse genetics, fruit fly genetics, etc. Molecular genetics, the molecular study of genetics including particularly DNA and RNA. What is genetics in science? Genetics is the science of genes, heredity and variation of organisms. Within organisms, genetic information generally is carried in chromosomes, where it is represented in a chemical structure of particular DNA molecules. How do you describe genetics? We can describe it as the study of genes and tries to explain what they are and how they work. Genes are how living organisms inherit features or traits from their ancestors. For example, children usually look like their parents because they have inherited their parents' gene. What is gene and genetics? A gene is a basic physical and functional unit of heredity. Genes are made up of DNA. Some genes act as instructions to make molecules called proteins. However, many genes do not code for proteins. In humans, genes vary in size from a few hundred DNA bases to more than 2 million bases. John Gregor Mendel presented his conclusions about heredity in 1886. In the year 1901, the reason behind the unexpected changes was understood due to the mutational theory of Hugo de Veris. Later, in 1902, Walter Sutton and Theodore Boveri observed paired chromosomes in the cells of a grasshopper. Chromosomes were not understood by anyone until then. To understand this research was began to understand finding the nature. Genetic material, when it was proved that genes are carried by chromosomes, in the year 1944, a trio of scientists, Oswald Avery, Maclean McCarthy, and Colleen MacLeod, proved that except viruses, all living organisms have DNA as genetic material. In the year 1961, the French geneticists Francis Jacob and Jacques Monod proposed model for process of protein synthesis with the help of DNA in the bacterial cell. This helped to discover the genetic models hidden in our DNA. Thereby, the technique of recombinant DNA technology came into being. Goals of recombinant DNA technology is to isolate and characterize a gene, to make desired alternations in one or more isolated genes, to return altered genes to living cells, artificially synthesize new gene, alternating the genome of an organism, understanding the hereditary disease and their cure, improving human genome. All this has a vast scope in the field of genetic engineering. Production of hybrid varieties of animals and plants were possible only because of it. Let's see how much we have understood. Dash is the transfer of characters from one generation to the other. Second is the pioneer. Dash is the pioneer of modern genetics. What is the full form of DNA? Variation means genetics is the science of dash. We will be continuing our lecture on the next topic, transcription, translocation and translation. Till then, thank you.